Welcome to part 2 of my top 10 favorite TV shows from 2022. Last time I took my sweet ass time before I even began talking about number 10 on the list, so let's not beat around the bush any more than we need to. Here's the numbers 5 through 1. Let's go, go, go! Number 5. Mobile Suit Gundam: The Witch from Mercury. Yeah, the very last episode of the season aired in January 2023, so I'm technically breaking my stupid only full seasons that finished within 2022 rule, but just barely. My arbitrary rules, my prerogative to bend or break them when I feel it's acceptable. This one is also probably a little extra high on the list because of my own bias as a longtime obsessive Gundam fan, but I know there are plenty of newcomers who have responded very well to this series too. Which is good, because that's partly why it was made, and made the way it was. One thing that's definitely helped the Gundam franchise endure for so long is the fact that every few years, they make a new series set in its own new alternate universe independent of any past continuity. It allows for a nice, accessible, standalone show for casual viewers to get into with no homework necessary. And it also means more creative freedom for the writers to build whole different Gundam worlds with different rules. Unlike when they do, say, a new sequel set in one of the longer-running fan-favorite timelines like the Universal Century or Cosmic Era. Witch from Mercury has been touted by some as Revolutionary Girl Utena with giant robots, and there are similarities to be sure. A female protagonist who in the first episode unwittingly becomes engaged to another girl who others covet as their ticket to a ton of power, a high school setting where everybody settles their conflicts by dueling, larger conspiracies at work that loom just outside of our heroine's knowledge or control while using them as essential pawns in their grand schemes, a hella catchy bop of an opening song, and both shows even have their own choo-choo. Gundam choo-choo is best choo-choo, and I will hear no arguments. But the similarities are pretty surface level at the end of the day and certainly don't detract from anything. Suletta, the shy, awkward little majo that could, and Miorine, her assertive, no-nonsense go-getter bride, both as individual characters and as the leading pair of the show, are more than different enough from Utena and Anthe to make for a whole different kind of story. This series also has the benefit of being made 25 years after Utena, and as part of a high-profile, financially successful franchise, so it features way less reused footage in its fights. In fact, the animation overall is among the most dazzling and crisp I've ever seen in any Gundam TV series. The spectacular action scenes and just the general look of the show are always rewarding to look at. This first season also stands out as it doesn't start as a war drama right off the bat like a lot of classic Gundam shows, but instead most of it centers on the characters' lives at this school, their challenges as they try to get their own business off the ground, dealing with classist friction between Earthian and Spatian students, and how they grow closer as a team, friends, actual girlfriends, in the process. Meanwhile, the intrigue, mysteries, and inevitable larger series conflict we only got a glimpse of in that much darker prologue episode gradually builds in the shadows, as the corporate powers butt heads, blackmail each other, and manipulate events in their own favor, until the power struggle really starts coming to a head in the last couple episodes. After seeing my share of traditionally told Gundam stories, and several other less traditional ones, I think this approach was pretty refreshing and effective, making the first arc of the series a relatively light, funny, endearing, almost slice-of-life underdog story that takes its time getting you invested enough in these teenagers so it can leave that much more of an impact when the story finally starts to show its true face and promises that things will never be quite the same for them again. Much like Chainsaw Man, there are only 12 episodes until the next season premieres, but in that time, The Witch from Mercury had more than enough cool mechs, laughs, feels, thrills, and chills to make me one happy Gundam maniac. Number 4. Cyberpunk Edge Runners. I probably sound like a broken record, but just like how I've never read the Chainsaw Man manga or much of Christopher Pike's novellas, I've also never played Cyberpunk 2077. But also, like those examples, that's not really a problem because this stands on its own just fine. Hell, more than fine. This anime is a gorgeous, kick-ass, provocative, tragic, exhilarating ride that exemplifies everything that makes the cyberpunk subgenre compelling. Which I suppose it damn well better, otherwise it might be kind of asinine to make the title of your show just straight up the same name as the subgenre it's in. It'd be like unironically naming a Clint Eastwood movie Spaghetti Western 1862 or something. The animation is by Studio Trigger of Promare, Kill la Kill, and BNA fame, and it shows. The series is visually stunning, from the tenderly lit moments of character depth and vulnerability to the tense, gory, and disturbing moments of stylish, kinda Mike Mignola-esque blends of color and heavy shadow, to the action scenes bursting with vibrant, wild, rip-roaring energy, all with no shortage of memorable character designs that visually convey almost as much about each of their personalities as the gripping writing does. Like the best cyberpunk stories, this one dumps the audience right into the middle of a gritty, futuristic world that's both clearly dystopian yet unsettlingly not too far off from the ways present-day society operates already. Issues of systemic inequality, the downtrodden turning to addictive, dangerous forms of escapism, and corrupt, monolithic megacorps running everything are not only still prevalent in the technologically advanced metropolis age, but have a tighter, colder, more merciless grip on people's lives than ever. Life is cheap, and the powerless are neglected, exploited, scapegoated, or straight up crushed by the powerful because who's gonna stop them? That's the kind of world that David and his gang of edgerunners live in and buck against, and while they can upgrade themselves with all sorts of tricked-out cyberware to help them fight their way up in this world just a little, the more a person does this, the more of their recognizably human body they lose, and the more of their sanity they risk losing. But while it's all too common for people in this world to lose their very souls to the process of chroming up, what makes the journey of David, Lucy, and their crew so engrossing to follow is how much of their humanity they do manage to hold on to in spite of everything. Edgerunners is about misfits who had nothing and essentially were nothing as far as anybody cared, surviving together on the fringes of what passes for polite society in this future, and fighting their way up to acquiring or protecting the precious few worthwhile things. Things they absolutely would sooner sacrifice their flesh, their minds, or even their lives than lose. Like a dream of getting out one day and living free somewhere far away. A found family that's there for you when shit hits the fan. And of course, the dirty, dangerous, but all the more life-affirming sense of freedom that comes from making your own way on your own terms. And while you're at it, maybe giving two big, chromy middle fingers to a system practically designed from top to bottom to break you and keep the lowborn low. Cyberpunk Edgerunners doesn't pull its punches, and delivers a profoundly human story with plenty of cyber spectacle and punk spirit to offer along the way. Number 3. Stranger Things, Season 4. Arguably the best season of the show yet, and definitely my new favorite. It's got some of the most intensely scary moments, some of the most powerful character work, and by far the most epic season finale in the whole series run so far. The soundtrack, pop culture references, and cultural climate depicted are as 1980s up the wazoo as we've come to expect from Stranger Things, and keeping with the classic coming-of-age 80s movie style this show has always had, it does a good job depicting the logical next step in the gang's lives as they enter high school and the kinds of problems that can bring. Drifting apart from childhood friends, dealing with peer pressure from the new and maybe wrong crowd you found yourself in, how things can change for friends and romantic partners after there's been a lot of time and distance between them, and the quiet loneliness of unrequited love. Pretty much everybody gets a little something compelling, or at least entertaining, but by far the highlights of character development in Season 4, of course, go to Eleven and Max. I swear, sometimes it feels like the working mantra of the show is Max must suffer, but damned if they're not good at it. Her arc dealing with trauma, depression, grief, and how people going through these things can push those closest to them away and resign themselves to keep suffering alone like a punishment they might feel like they deserve in some way, is some of the realest, most poignant stuff in the whole show. And of course, that whole sequence with the cemetery, the letter reading, the nightmare fuel, the running up that hill climax, it all made for one of the most heart-wrenching, nerve-wracking, cathartic, just brilliant several minutes of television I've ever seen. Eleven has quite the journey in this season too. Her self-confidence, sense of belonging, and even her superpowers are at the lowest we've ever seen them in the beginning of the season. She has to relive some pretty harrowing, understandably repressed memories, and even has to work with her childhood abuser again. Props for how that whole reunion was written, directed, and performed. Papa does play a crucial role in getting Eleven back to full power, and he is convincing enough as a real person who really believes all he's done was justifiable and that he does care for her in his own way. But thankfully, they still don't vindicate the abusive relationship this is and always was. And while Elle does have a pretty good confrontation with him, they also don't glorify the idea of Elle or anybody else killing the guy would really be a victory or the closure she needs, because that's not how overcoming abuse and trauma works either. And in a storyline where teens are going through complicated inner turmoil, what better enemy to pit them against than one straight out of A Nightmare on Elm Street? Well, I say that, and the show itself certainly makes no secret of the Elm Street influences. One episode even treats us to an awesome cameo by Robert Englund himself. But I'm just gonna say it, Vecna is way scarier than Freddy Krueger ever was. I love Captain Christmas Sweater, but I think the way Vecna was presented made stronger use of the potential for deeper personal horror that comes with a killer who preys on people from inside their minds. The ways he slowly creeps into his victims' heads, learns their deepest fears, regrets, and damages, and so articulately uses that in just the right ways to psychologically corner them with their own despair and self-hatred until they're right where he wants them. Every time this guy does his thing, it is spine-chilling. I was initially a bit disappointed with how Vecna's backstory kind of lessens that cool, alien, eldritch horror that the Upside Down used to have, by not only giving us a big bad with comprehensibly human motives, albeit motives of an evil psychopathic human, but by also tying virtually everything we've seen from the Upside Down in the series back to him. But hey, at the end of the day, the dude does have plenty of horrifying gravitas of his own, and if making the conflict more personal was the direction they wanted to take things going into the final season, I think they honestly did a pretty effective job of it. Hell, having a specific target to go after made it all the more exciting to see the gang at long last going full badass and taking the fight to the Upside Down in that phenomenal finale. There's plenty more going on this season I could talk about, but suffice to say, Stranger Things 4 was just the biggest, best season of one of Netflix's biggest, best shows. Number 2. Made in Abyss, Golden City of the Scorching Sun. Or just Made in Abyss Season 2 for short. It's hard to properly put into words why this anime is such an incredible viewing experience. I suppose, slightly similar to Stranger Things, it's a story of childhood innocence, friendship, and idealistic spirit meeting Lovecraftian existential terrors of the unknown, but Made in Abyss is a literally deeper, darker dive into the latter. The titular massive abyss that Rico, Reg, and Nanachi travel through is filled to the brim with bizarre sights and obstacles that often have this way of conveying both the wondrous beauty as well as the sheer enormity and soul-crushing indifference of the forces of nature. Its world-building and story turns are chillingly morbid, brutal, and nihilistic, but its character work is so emotionally captivating, nuanced, and meaningful. The first season was amazing at this as Reg and Rico begin their adventure down the abyss and encounter environment after creature after character that all highlight how in over their heads these small children are on this journey, even with the benefits of one of them being a nigh indestructible superpowered robot. The movie, Dawn of the Deep Soul, was amazing-er, as they contend with whole new haunting revelations about not only the horrors of the abyss, but the even more disturbing horrors that human beings are capable of committing or becoming in the name of knowledge and exploration. And this second season is arguably amazingist, as the world, its history, and the journey our heroes are on continue to become more complex and challenging. At least when nobody's busy pooping. There's a surprising amount of pooping in this season. Because for all the praise I will happily heap on this show, it also wouldn't be Made in Abyss without those occasional awkward and kinda gross parts. Though I'm told the anime is considerably less squicky than the manga could get at times. Make of that what you will. Our young heroes take their first steps into the fabled sixth layer, the point of no return from which no human being can ever ascend back up without the curse of the abyss hideously stripping them of every trace of humanity. The village they encounter where the curse has no effect, its peculiar denizens, the immortal feral Princess Fapta, and the gradual revelations of how they all came to be the way they are, weave yet another poetically twisted, heartbreaking tale of souls that tried to explore too deep down the abyss. We saw with Bondrewd the disturbing lengths that some might go to in pursuit of the rumble of scientific triumph in a place like this, the sacrifices they'll deem acceptable to gain knowledge that humans may just have no business knowing. Here we see with the origins of the Hollow Village how far desperate people will go and what sacrifices they'll deem acceptable to gain themselves a way to survive, even stagnantly, in a place humans may just have no business surviving in. Without spoiling too many details, let's just say Fopta has a uniquely personal beef with the foundations the villagers have been living on top of, making for quite an interesting conflict in the bloody, exciting, and moving last few episodes. Rico, Reg, and Nanachi are as lovable and engaging as ever. I cannot believe you guys found a way to rip our hearts out over you-know-what a second time. But Fopta herself really does steal the show this season. She's a squirrely, innocent, adorable as hell animal girl one minute, and a pants-shittingly fearsome powerhouse the next. If there's any singular character that embodies that special mix of strange, otherworldly danger and primal, majestic beauty of the abyss itself, it's Fopta, Princess of the Hollows. With its fantastic visuals, spellbinding music by Kevin Penkin, and both emotionally and existentially rich writing, Made in Abyss was already one of my all-time favorite anime, and Season 2 proved to be everything I loved about it and more. Number 1. Star Trek: Strange New Worlds. There were no less than 4 new Star Trek series or seasons premiering in the year 2022. Hell, 5 if you count half seasons like Discovery Season 4 Part 2. There was that, Picard Season 2, Lower Decks Season 3, Prodigy Season 1. But of all the Star Trek content that came out this year, or hell, in recent years, Strange New Worlds was probably the most anticipated and warmly received by fans and hitherto haters of modern Trek alike. I personally was the former, for whatever that's worth. I really like the Kelvin timeline movies for the most part. I think Lower Decks and Prodigy are both a ton of fun, whether you're a Trekkie or not. And I think the controversial Discovery and Picard are okay. They get a lot of shit, and yes, plenty of the criticisms are perfectly fair and valid, though I think a lot of the critiques also get blown way, way out of proportion. But that's pretty much par for the course when any massive fan base is so strongly divided on something. Anyway, since I already unironically enjoyed modern Star Trek more often than not, I didn't go into this show needing it to redeem this era of the franchise, like it was our last best hope of getting quote-unquote real Star Trek back or whatever. That being said, I agree, after 2 heavily dramatic shows with dark, season-long storylines and Fate of the Galaxy level stakes, Strange New Worlds returned to the more relaxed, episodic space adventure of the week format like the classic shows was just the breath of fresh air we all needed at this point. Another thing modern Trek fans and haters often agree on is that Anson Mount as Captain Pike and Ethan Peck as Spock were the highlights of Discovery Season 2, and the potential for a great spin-off show with them was not only obvious, but chock full of promise. Sure, as a prequel series, there are certain limits to what can and can't happen, but showcasing the pre-Captain Kirk adventures of the Enterprise still allows for a ton of creative freedom to introduce interesting new characters who, for one reason or another, aren't part of the crew anymore by the time of the original series, to explore the earlier days of classic crew members like Spock and Uhura, and how they grew into the icons we know, or in Uhura's case, retroactively giving the character more personality and agency than she ever really had in TOS. And of course, to come up with all sorts of creative new stories involving creative new alien cultures that we can assume were always around, but they just didn't happen to come up as much in later Trek. Strange New Worlds takes full advantage of all of these opportunities inherent to its premise, as well as managing to go further than expected in some places. The period this show takes place in allows some of the stories to bring a welcome, renewed sense of mystery and menace to classic enemies we've gotten used to, like the Romulans, and especially the now truly terrifying Gorn. And instead of doing a 100% pure prequel with all of the characters blissfully unaware of their futures, and the storytelling limits that can come with that, they made the, I think, brilliant choice of letting Captain Pike in on the big thing that fans of the original series remember, and always would have been thinking about going into any Pike spinoff: the grisly fate that awaits him a few years down the line. It's real easy to embrace your destiny when said destiny stops just short of declaring you space Jesus, and promises that even after sacrificing your corporeal existence, you will be able to return to your friends and family someday. How are you supposed to deal with knowing your destiny instead looks like this? I love Captain Sisko and Deep Space Nine, by the way. I just kind of felt like being a smartass. But yeah, Pike having foreknowledge of how these adventures will end looming over his head the whole time was great for character introspection, as well as some fascinating temptations and what-if scenarios if he were to try to change the future. The best example of this being the last episode of the season, which was not only a great story for Pike, but I think was a more successful spin on the classic episode Balance of Terror than, say, Star Trek Into Darkness was for The Wrath of Khan. And ultimately how the man reconciles with his future and keeps moving forward, being the best damn Starfleet officer he can be in the meantime, gives his character something truly special going for it in the franchise's pantheon of beloved captains. I think another reason why Strange New Worlds was such a triumph is that it managed to be both a return to the more traditional Star Trek storytelling that some fans who were disappointed with the modern shows wanted, while still very much being a modern Trek series in many of the good ways. It has cinematic level production values that make for spectacular action scenes and all the more grandiose moments of space-age wonder. Some of the episodes occasionally went darker and more intense, and even willing to turn off the main character shields for someone who was tragically just becoming one of my new favorites on the show. And while I said it was episodic, the reason why that particular death was so impactful was thanks to the fact that there is ongoing and strong character development from episode to episode, and a correct order to watch them all in, as opposed to TOS where the cast was plenty endearing, but the characters and their relationships rarely changed much from the first episode to the last. I could go on and on about stuff I loved about this show, but overall, Star Trek Strange New Worlds is equal parts a love letter to the wider franchise, and just a damn fun, exciting, intelligent, all-around solid series in its own right. It may take place in the universe's past, but if the quality of the show itself is any indication, it represents a bright future for Star Trek on the small screen. In the end, the hopeless Trekkie in me just couldn't place it anywhere but at number 1 as my favorite TV series from 2022. Well, those were my top 10 faves from last year. Maybe I'll do this again next year, maybe not, but either way, here's hoping 2023 will have no shortage of awesome new content too. What did you guys think? What were your top shows of the year? Let me know in the comments. I'm the Adorkable RJ. Thanks for watching, and until next time, glory to fankind.